Well, folks, let's dive right into this. Imagine it's one of those crisp evenings back in the day, say around the 1950s, when the world was buzzing with new ideas after the war. We'd gather in a lecture hall at a place like Caltech, the air humming with the excitement of figuring out the universe's secrets. Tonight, or whenever you're listening, we're going to talk about something that sounds simple at first: cold, really cold. The kind of cold that makes you wonder if everything in the world can just stop moving. But as we'll see, nature has a funny way of saying no. It's not about fancy gadgets or distant stars. It's about the everyday stuff around us, like the ice in your drink or the chill in the air on a winter morning. And by the end of this chat, I hope you'll see why reaching the absolute bottom of the temperature scale isn't just hard, it's downright impossible. We'll take it step by step using ideas from physics and a bit of math that's more like common sense than rocket science. No need for pencils and paper, just follow along. First off, what do we mean by temperature? Think of it like this. In any room full of people, some are running around full of energy, others are sitting quietly. Temperature is just the average pep in the crowd, the average energy of all the tiny bits that make up everything. Those bits are atoms and molecules, jiggling like kids at a playground. When it's hot, they're bouncing off each other wildly, like a party that's gotten out of hand. When it's cold, the party's winding down and they're moving slower. Back in the 1860s, folks like James Clerk Maxwell figured this out with what we call kinetic theory. It's the idea that heat is motion, plain and simple. Fast forward to the 1950s, when we were building all sorts of machines after the war, and this theory was helping engineers design better engines for cars and planes. Imagine a Ford Model T chugging along. If it overheats, the parts expand and rub wrong. Cool it down and things smooth out. That's temperature in action. In a hot cup of coffee, the molecules are all over the place. High entropy. Let it cool and they settle a bit. Lower entropy. Now, here's where math sneaks in, but don't worry, it's like figuring out the average speed of cars on a highway. In physics, we describe how energy relates to entropy with a concept that's like the slope of a line. If you plot energy on one side and entropy on the other, the steepness of that line at any point tells you the temperature. Steeper slope means higher temperature, more energy needed to add a bit more disorder. This comes from the work of Ludwig Boltzmann in the late 1800s, and by the 1960s, when I was teaching at Caltech, we were using it to explain everything from steam engines to the stars. Why does this matter for cold? Well, to get something really cold, you're trying to take away that energy to make the jiggle almost nothing. Absolute zero is the point where, in theory, all motion stops. No jiggle left. That's zero on the Kelvin scale, which is like Celsius, but starting from that absolute bottom instead of water freezing. It's about minus 27 to 3 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make your bones ache just thinking about it. Scientists in the early 1900s like Walther Nernst started puzzling over this. Nernst was a German chemist, and around 1912 he came up with what's now called the third law of thermodynamics. It's not some dusty rule, it's a profound statement about how the universe works. Basically, it says that as you approach absolute zero, the entropy of a perfect system drops to a minimum, often zero for something like a flawless crystal. But here's the kicker, you can't actually get there. It's like trying to reach the horizon. You keep walking, but it slips away. Let me explain why with an everyday picture. Suppose you have a refrigerator. To cool something, it pumps heat out, like sucking the energy from the room into the coils. But each time you do that, you're using work from electricity, and some energy gets wasted as more heat. That's the second law of thermodynamics at play. Things naturally go toward disorder, so cooling is an uphill battle. Near absolute zero, that battle gets steeper. Imagine cooling a glass of water step by step. First you freeze it into ice, easy enough. Then to get colder, you'd need to remove the vibrations from the ice molecules. But as it gets colder, those vibrations weaken, and it takes more and more effort to yank out the last bits. In fact, the math shows you'd need an infinite number of steps or infinite time to hit exactly zero. It's like dividing a cake into smaller and smaller pieces forever. You never quite finish. This isn't just theory. In the 1920s and 1930s, experimenters were trying it with gases like helium. Helium is tricky because it stays liquid even at super low temperatures, unlike most stuff that solidifies. By the 1950s, labs in places like Purdue University were using ISIS pumps to liquefy helium and push it toward colder realm. They got down to about 1 degree Kelvin, but then things slowed to a crawl. The heat capacity, the amount of energy you can pull out per degree drop, starts behaving oddly. In math terms, it's like integrating the area under a curve where the curve flattens out near zero. You add up all the little bits of heat you can remove, but as you get closer, the bits get tinier and tinier, and the total path to zero stretches out endlessly. Nernst's law, which won him a Nobel in 1920, formalized this. The entropy change you can achieve in a process goes to zero as temperature does, so no finite process can bridge that last gap. Now, this classical view from thermodynamics is fascinating, but it's only half the story. Back in those post-war years, the 1940s and 1950s, quantum mechanics was shaking everything up. I remember working on projects during the war, like at Los Alamos, where we dealt with the weird behaviors of particles at tiny scale. Quantum mechanics says the world isn't smooth like a billiard table, it's fuzzy, full of uncertainties. Werner Heisenberg nailed this in 1927 with his uncertainty principle. It boils down to this: you can't know everything about a particle at once. If you pin down exactly where it is, you lose track of how fast it's moving, and vice versa. It's like trying to photograph a speeding car. You either get a sharp position but a blur of motion, or a clear speed but no idea where it is. At absolute zero, if all motion stopped, every particle would have zero speed, exact momentum of nothing. But that would mean you know its position perfectly, which violates the uncertainty rule. There's always a minimum fuzz, a little unavoidable jiggle. This is called zero-point energy, and it comes from the quantum rules for waves and vibrations. Think of an atom in a solid as a tiny spring, oscillating back and forth. In the old classical world, you could imagine stopping it dead. But quantumly, the lowest energy state still has it humming a bit, like the ground state of a musical instrument that can't be perfectly silent. Max Planck kicked this off in 1900 when he realized energy comes in packets, quanta, not continuous flow. By the 1950s, this was standard in labs studying crystals and metals at low temps. To picture the math without getting lost, imagine describing the energy distribution of these oscillators. It's like averaging over a bunch of possible states, weighting them by how likely they are. The average doesn't drop to zero. There's a floor set by a tiny constant called Planck's h-bar, which is the quantum of action. In the 1960s, when we were probing materials for new technologies, like early transistors at Bell Labs, this zero-point motion explained why even the coldest metals still conduct electricity in quirky ways. Experiments showed that crystals vibrate with this minimum energy, no matter how much you cool them. It's nature's way of keeping things lively. But let's tie this back to the bigger picture. In thermodynamics, we saw the third law blocking the path with infinite steps. Quantum mechanics adds the ironclad rule that even if you could take those steps, you'd still have residual motion. Combine them, and absolute zero becomes not just unreachable, but forbidden. During the Cold War era in the 1950s and 1960s, there was a race to achieve lower and lower temperatures. Places like the National Bureau of Standards were using magnetic cooling on salts to squeeze out heat, getting to fractions of a degree Kelvin. But every time that quantum floor stopped them. Helium, for instance, becomes a superfluid below about 2.2 Kelvin, flowing without friction, like a liquid with no viscosity. That's amazing for tech, like in the big magnets for particle accelerators we were building then, but it also shows the limit. The superfluidity arises precisely because of those quantum effects, preventing a full freeze. I recall discussions in those days about how this impossibility shapes the universe. In stars or engines, heat flows one way from hot to cold, driving everything. If absolute zero were possible, maybe we'd have perfect efficiency. No waste. But no, the laws ensure there's always some disorder left, and in quantum terms, it's the vacuum itself that's alive. Even empty space has fluctuations, tiny pops of energy that keep the whole show going. This was emerging in the field of quantum electrodynamics, or QED, which deals with light and electrons dancing in probabilistic ways. In QED, particles don't sit still, they interact via virtual exchanges, ensuring no true stillness. Suppose you're cooling a sample in a cryostat, that insulated chamber we used in the 1970s for precise measurements. You pump out the helium vapor, dropping the temp degree by degree. The heat capacity curve, which you can think of as the total energy you need to remove, flattens asymptotically towards zero. Mathematically, it's like the area under a graph that approaches but never touches the axis. Experiments confirmed Nernst's predictions. For insulators, entropy hits a constant. For metals, electron contributions add a linear term, but still no zero. By the 1980s, with laser cooling techniques starting to emerge, zapping atoms with light to slow them down, we got even closer to microkelvins, but the quantum barrier held firm. It's not abstract, it's why your freezer works, but can't make absolute zero ice cubes. In the post-war boom, this knowledge fueled inventions from superconducting wires for power lines to the early computers crunching numbers at places like IBM. Superconductivity discovered in 1911, but exploding in understanding by the 1957 BCS theory, happens near absolute zero, where electron pairs glide without resistance. But even there, it's not zero temp, it's just low enough for quantum pairing to dominate. As we wrap up this first part of our exploration, think about how these concepts interconnect. Temperature as average motion, entropy as disorder, the third law as infinite chase, and quantum uncertainties, eternal jiggle, they all point to the same conclusion. Nature doesn't allow a complete stop. It's as if the universe is designed to keep evolving, always with a spark of activity. In the next stretch, we'll dig deeper into experiments from those exciting decades and what it all means for our understanding of reality. But for now, ponder this. Next time you feel the cold, remember those tiny dances that can never quite quit. It's the beauty of it all. All right, let's pick up where we left off and dive into some real adventures from those heady days of science. Back in the 1950s, right after the war, labs around the world were in a frenzy to push temperatures lower than ever. It wasn't just curiosity, it was tied to big projects like the space race. NASA and Soviet teams were racing to cool materials for rocket fuels and detectors. In Moscow, Peter Kapitsa, who snagged a Nobel in 1978, was tinkering with helium setups. He built machines that mixed helium isotopes, helium-3 and helium-4, to dilute and cool things down to thousandths of a degree. These dilution refrigerators worked like a clever cocktail mixer, where one helium pulls heat from the other as they separate. By the 1960s, places like Bell Labs were using them to hit about 0.00. Quantum rules kicked in hard. At those lows, helium turns into a superfluid, flowing without any stickiness, like water through a sieve with no resistance. That superfluidity, discovered in the 1930s but really explored in the post-war years, lets the liquid climb walls and leak through tiny holes. It's amazing for experiments, but it also means the system resists freezing solid. Those quantum waves keep it liquid and moving. Think about how we describe this mathematically without getting tangled. The behavior of particles at low temps follows statistics, like sorting a deck of cards where some rules forbid certain arrangements. For bosons, particles with whole number spins, they can pile into the same low-energy state, creating that superfluid flow. It's like all the kids in a playground deciding to swing together in perfect sync. The distribution of energies is like a curve that spikes at the bottom, but never flattens to nothing. Lev Landau, a sharp Soviet physicist, whose work in the 1930s influenced us all through the 1950s, explained this with ideas of quasi-particles, fake particles, that describe the excitations in the fluid. His book on statistical physics, updated in the late 1950s, showed how the energy spectrum has a gap or a minimum that prevents total stillness. Experiments in the 1960s, like at the University of Illinois, confirmed it pumped more cooling, and you'd see the heat capacity drop, but then quantum effects like phonon scattering, sound waves in the material take over, adding back a tiny but persistent energy. Not all attempts were with liquids. Some folks tried solids and magnets. In the 1950s at the National Institute of Standards, they used adiabatic demagnetization on salts. You'd magnetize a crystal, align the spins like little arrows, then remove the field while insulating it. The disorder from the spins absorbs heat, cooling the sample. They got to about 0.01 Kelvin, useful for studying nuclear spins in the 1960s. But again, the limit hit. As temps drop, the spin entropy decreases slowly, like a graph approaching zero asymptotic. You'd need infinite field changes to suck out the last bit. I remember hearing about these at conferences in the 1970s, folks laughing over coffee about how close they got, only for nature to whisper, not cool. One epic fail was trying to cool below a millikelvin. Without fancy isotopes, impurities in the materials always leaked heat back in, like a drafty window ruining your insulation. At places like Stanford, near where I spent time consulting, they'd shine lasers on gas atoms, tuning the frequency so the light pushes against their motion, like a headwind slowing a cyclist. This got atoms to microkelvins, colder than space in some ways. But even here, the Doppler effect and quantum recoil set a floor. The light kicks back a bit of momentum, enforcing that uncertainty jiggle. The math behind it is like solving for the average velocity in a distribution that's broadened by the laser interaction. The curve of probabilities for atom speeds never narrows to a point. There's always a spread. These experiments weren't just games. They led to better atomic clocks for GPS in the 1980s, timing things to billionths of a second. Shifting gears a bit, let's talk about why this all ties into the deeper quantum world, especially quantum electrodynamics, or QED. In the 1940s, during my early work, we were sorting out how electrons and light interact at the tiniest level.
QED is like a dance where particles exchange virtual messengers, photons that pop in and out of existence. Even in a vacuum, supposedly empty space, there's this bubbling activity. At absolute zero you'd expect silence, but no, the vacuum has energy from these fluctuations. It's called the zero-point field, and it means the ground state of the universe isn't flat zero. Picture it as the ocean floor, with constant ripples. You can't smooth it perfectly. In QED we describe this with sums over all possible paths a particle could take, like averaging every route from A to B. The result, a non-zero baseline energy that permeates everything. We'd get crazy big numbers for energies, but by renormalizing, subtracting the vacuum contributions, we made sense of it. By the 1950s, experiments at Columbia University tested QED predictions, like the Lamb shift in hydrogen atoms, where electron orbits wobble due to vacuum interaction. At low temps, this vacuum energy becomes glaring. It prevents total cooling, because suppressing those fluctuations would require countering the universe's built-in buzz. In the 1960s, when particle accelerators like SLAC were firing up, we saw how these effects scale up. Electrons scattering off protons revealed the vacuum's role in holding quarks together. For cooling, it means your sample is always bathing in this quantum foam, picking up tiny energies that can't be drained. To simplify the math side, think of the energy as an integral over all frequencies of these vacuum modes. It's like adding up contributions from every possible wave, and the lowest cutoff is set by Planck's rules, not zero. Books from that era, like my own lectures on physics from the early 1960s, touch on this in chapters about quantum mechanics and fields. We explain how the harmonic oscillator in quantum terms has half a quantum of energy at minimum, stacking up for every mode in space. That's why absolute zero would demand shutting down infinite modes, an impossible task. In the 1970s, as quantum field theory matured, folks like Stephen Hawking applied this to black holes, showing even they evaporate from vacuum fluctuation. But back to our cold chase, it freezes the mind to realize the universe's fabric itself rebels against perfect stillness. Now what if we could somehow reach it? Pure fantasy, but fun to ponder. If absolute zero were achievable, entropy would hit rock bottom, perfect order. Machines could run without waste, like a perpetual motion device of the second kind, but that's outlawed by the laws we know. In information terms, from Rolf Landauer's work at IBM in 1961, erasing a bit of data costs a tiny energy tied to temperature. At zero, you'd erase for free, leading to reversible computing, flip bits back and forth, without heat. But quantum rules like the no-cloning theorem from the early 1980s say you can't copy quantum states perfectly, adding uncertainty that demands energy. The entropy of information is like a sum of probabilities, weighted by their logs, always leaving a residue in superpositions. Real implications hit home in tech from those decades. Superconductors, key to MRI machines rolling out in the 1970s, work at liquid helium temps, about 4 Kelvin. Their resistance vanishes because electron pairs form a condensate, but zero-point vibrations limit how low you need to go. Without that quantum floor, maybe we'd have room-temp superconductors, but no, the barrier drives innovation. In cosmology, the cosmic microwave background discovered in 1965 at Bell Labs sits at 2.7 Kelvin, a relic of the Big Bang. It's the universe's average cold, far from zero, with fluctuations seeding galaxies via quantum effects from the early cosmos. Inflation theory in the 1970s suggested those seeds come from vacuum wiggles amplified in the bang. Experiments in the 1980s pushed Bose-Einstein condensates, where atoms act as one big wave, at nano-Kelvin. Theorized in the 1920s, but achieved later, they show quantum weirdness macroscopically, atoms blurring into each other. But even in a BEC, there's thermal motion residue. Perfect zero would collapse it into infinity or something absurd. The distribution function for bosons condenses below a critical temp, but the ground state still hums. Wrapping this all up, the chase for the ultimate cold reveals nature's elegance. From thermodynamic steps stretching infinitely to quantum dances that never end, it's a beautiful note. In those vibrant years from the 1950s to the 1980s, we built accelerators, computers, and medical tools on these limits. It's not about failure, it's about understanding why the universe ticks with perpetual motion. Next time you sip a cold drink or gaze at the stars, appreciate that subtle spark. Physics isn't cold facts, it's the warm thrill of discovery. Thanks for joining this ramble. Keep questioning.